Hey guys, just wanted to make a quick video on some examples of bias. So first and second period, we didn't get very far. We got through the notes, but we didn't get to talk about many examples of bias. So after you've kind of looked through the PowerPoint of the notes that I have on my website, this is just so you can look at through some examples and look at different types of bias in the real world. So enjoy. We'll start with a couple of examples of response bias. So this first one says, in January 2006, the New York Times asked a sample of some adults, U.S. adults, one of two questions. So the first half of the sample got this question: after 9/11, President Bush authorized government wiretaps on some phone calls in the U.S. without getting court warrants, saying this was necessary to reduce the threat of terrorism. Do you approve or disapprove of this? And in that half of the sample, 53% of respondents approved. The other half of the sample got this question: after 9/11, George W. Bush authorized government wiretaps on some phone calls in the U.S. without getting court warrants. Do you approve or disapprove? And in that one, only 46% approve. So it may not seem like a huge difference, but it is a difference between majority and not majority. So this is an example of just including a couple of different phrasings in the way the question is asked. So the one on the left includes that little bit of information about what the wiretaps were for, saying they were reducing terrorism. The other thing is that the left refers to him as President Bush, whereas the one on the right refers to him as just George W. Bush. So just adding in those couple of differences in the wording of the question, it led to this change in percentage of people who approved. So that is one example of the way wording in a question can influence the answers that you get. We call that response bias or wording bias. Another example, this is in spring 1993. The Holocaust Memorial Museum was opened. A survey conducted by Roper Starch Worldwide indicated that 22% of the American public thought it was possible that the Nazi extermination of the Jews never happened, which is kind of a very large amount, and that 12% were unsure. So very curious about this high percentage of people who thought there was a huge conspiracy in terms of the Nazis. They did another survey where they looked at the question that was asked in the particular survey that they used, and the question that was asked was this: does it seem possible or does it seem impossible to you that the Nazi extermination of the Jews never happened? So it's a little bit of a confusing question. Saying yes actually says you think it's possible it never happened, whereas maybe a lot of people said yes, it happened. So that kind of led to some things. So they decided to redo the survey, and the new question just kind of clarified what they were asking. Does it seem possible that it never happened, or do you feel certain that it happened? And in that situation, less than 1% thought that they thought it was possible that it didn't happen. So a much more reasonable percentage of people in this survey. So there's a couple of examples of response bias. So now I'm just going to look at a few different examples. What I would suggest is, as we go through these situations, kind of pause the video, see what you think it might be, the type of bias that might be present, and then I'll go on and answer it. So in this first scenario, before the presidential election, FDR against Republican Landon, the magazine Literary Digest predicted that Landon would win in a 3-2 victory. And this was a survey of 2.8 million people. George Gallup did another survey or another poll with only 50,000 people and predicted that Roosevelt would win. Spoiler alert, Roosevelt won. One thing to note is that the Digest survey came from magazine subscribers, car owners, and telephone directories. So go ahead and pause, think about what types of bias might exist in this one, and I'll answer it in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So a couple of options here, but the big one I think is undercoverage, since the Digest survey only came from people who own cars or have telephones. In this time period in history, both of those things meant that you were very, very rich. Not very many people had cars or even telephones at home. So because of this, we have mostly higher income families being represented in the Literary Digest survey, and they were probably more Republicans than Democrats because it was mostly higher income families. So it was undercovering or underrepresenting people who were Democrats or people who were poor, and those are the people who were voting for Roosevelt. Next example. Suppose you want to estimate the total amount of money spent on textbooks each semester at SMU. You collect information from register receipts from students as they leave the campus bookstore one day during lunch. Give you a minute to think about it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I saw two things here. You could say that it's convenient sampling. This is a really easy, simple way to collect data. There was no attempt at randomness in this one. It's just one person standing at the outside of a bookstore and waiting as people walk by. So definitely some convenience. But because of that convenient sampling, it led to some undercoverage. People who either buy books from a different bookstore or buy books not at lunch that one day, or even people who buy books online or don't buy books at all, are not included in the sampling process. So there's a lot of people who weren't included, and that is definitely undercoverage. So I could see both of those things, either convenient sampling or undercoverage. So our next example, to find the average value of a home in Austin, someone averages the price of homes that are listed for sale with a realtor. So go ahead and pause, think about it. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Here's what I think. Again, undercoverage. This leaves out homes that aren't for sale. So we didn't say we wanted to find the average value of homes for sale in Austin. We just wanted the value of all homes in Austin. So it leaves out homes that are not for sale. It also leaves out homes that may be listed with different realtors or just listed for sale by the owner themselves. Other answers are possible. And you could say, maybe I've heard some students say convenient sample because you're just going to one realtor. Maybe that's a realtor you know, someone that you're friendly with, and so that may do some. You may have just said, hey, realtors, tell me about the prices of your homes, and that you could have maybe said it was voluntary response. But I think the most obvious is undercoverage. All right, so that is all the examples I had on the PowerPoint. If you have any questions, don't forget to come see me.